Cool. So, Jack, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, guys.
No worries. I guess to start with, let's jump in with the juicy detail. What exactly, how could you explain what Tataria is? And I guess the second part of that is, why is it so important today to know about Tataria?
Sure. So, Tataria was an empire that was founded by the descendants of the biblical prophet Noah. So, Noah had a son named Japhet, and Japhet had a son named Turk. In some interpretations, he's the biological son of Japhet. In others, he is the adopted son. Regardless, Turk ruled over many parts of contemporary Eurasia and segments of the Middle East until he died, and then his son Tanakh Khan took over. Tanakh was succeeded by Jesla Khan, then Dibakai Khan, Khajuk Khan, and then finally Alonza Khan. And Alonza Khan had two sons whose names were Tatar and Mughal. So when Alonza Khan died, his empire was split between the two brothers, forming the Mongolian and the Tartarian empires, respectively. So when Genghis Khan came along over 1,000 years after the fact, he didn't found the Mongol Empire. He didn't found the Tartar Empire either. He reunited these empires, which had already existed for over 1,000 years at that point. So why that's really important to understand is because when we look at these historical maps and these writings, and we see this term Tartaria or Tartar, and it's oftentimes used interchangeably between Mongol and Tartar. This context is really important to understand that we're talking about the same historical lineage. That's why these terms are used interchangeably. For instance, when you look at writings surrounding the 1480 stand at Ugar River between Ivan III's Muscovites and Ahmet Khan's Tartarian forces, we oftentimes, contemporary historians will say this is when Moscow gained its sovereignty. It cast off the Mongol yoke. But then we find hundreds of writings that say that they actually cast off the Tartar yoke. So this context is really important for us to understand what they're actually talking about in these historical writings, what they're talking about on these maps. It was not a mistake made by cartographers of the time, like a lot of contemporary historians will tell us. It was not a region. It was not a horde of barbarians. It was not a land mass inhabited by nomadic barbarian tribes. This was a sophisticated empire that was later integrated into the larger Mongol imperial structure by Genghis Khan.
Okay. I didn't know the correlation that much about Genghis Khan, Mongolia, and Tataria.
So, was Genghis Khan a descendant of Noah then?
That's what a lot of, I mean, the idea is that everybody was a descendant of Noah, right? Because Noah had his three sons. So yes, Genghis Khan would have been a descendant or a direct descendant of Noah, depending on the interpretation of the text that you personally subscribe to. In some of the more Islamic traditions, we oftentimes see that Turk is the biological son of Japhet, whereas in other writings, he's the adopted son. And in the more canonized King James Bible, we don't even see any mention of Turk at all. And I believe that's sort of a whitewash.
Right, yeah. So why do a lot of people dismiss the idea that Tataria was even a place?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? Because um, I mean, there's a lot of different aspects that go into answering that question, but we can start with the 1439 Council of Florence, which is where I believe a lot of this coordinated effort began to erase Tartar history and conquer this empire. So at the 1439 Council of Florence, it was a reunification of the Eastern and Western churches after the Great Schism of the Avignon papacy, which is a whole nother topic in and of itself. It was like eight different popes were grappling over or eight different bishops were grappling over the papal throne. At that time, it was around 1300. And it ended up the papacy was brought from St. Peter's Basilica into Avignon, France for about a century. And then one pope ended up coming out on top. Regardless, and that led to the Great Schism. The Orthodox Church split off, and the Vatican became its own thing. At the 1430 Council of Florence, there was a temporary, quote unquote, temporary reunion between the Eastern and Western churches, between the Russian Orthodox Church and the Vatican. But this was not just a spiritual reunification of the Eastern and Western churches. This was a military reunification between the forces of the Muscovites under Ivan III and the forces of the papacy and the Holy Roman Empire as a whole. So after 242 years of occupation by the Tartar Empire, the Mongol Empire, the Great Horde, whatever you want to call it, Moscow was finally annexed by Ivan III's Muscovites, which Ivan III, as a side note, was married to a niece of the last Byzantine emperor. She was actually a princess to the Byzantine emperor, to the Byzantine throne. So I don't think it's a coincidence that this Council of Florence took place just 40 years prior to the Muscovites finally being able to cast off the Tartar yoke in 1480 and gain their sovereignty. Because again, for over 250 years, or almost 250 years, Moscow had been a subject, had been essentially a vassal state or occupied by the Tartarians. They paid tax to the Tartarians, and they were occupied militarily by them. And also, fast forward 70 years from there, Ivan IV, otherwise known as Ivan the Terrible, was able to conquer Kazan. I believe this was an effort that was aided by the Holy Roman Empire, by this temporary alliance that was drawn between the East and the West, when Ivan IV led 150,000 troops to the city of Kazan, completely surrounded it, and laid siege, ended up beheading Yadigar Khan towards the end of that. And then we saw Ivan IV reattributing many of the architectural marvels in that city to himself, and completely whitewashing and erasing the history of Kazan. So the story doesn't end there, because in 1783, the last Khanate of the Tartar Empire, the Great Khanate of Crimea, was conquered by Catherine the Great, a member of the Romanov family. This was in, again, 1783. And many researchers will argue that the torch was then passed to the Ottomans, which that empire didn't fall until 1918. A lot of stuff happened around World War I, World War II, and this is when this whitewashing effort began to ramp up, because not only did the Ottoman Empire fall in 1918, the Romanov family, which was actually considered benevolent, to some extent, they allowed the Tartars to maintain a certain degree of religious and cultural autonomy. They were able to elect their own leadership. They were considered a nation within the greater Russian Empire. They were taxed. There were various rebellions from the Mohammedan Tartars, but they were allowed to maintain a certain degree of religious and cultural autonomy. And all of that changed when the Romanov family was beheaded and overthrown by the Bolshevik Revolution in 1918. Fast forward to World War II in 1944. The mass genocide and the relocation of the Crimean Tartars was taking place. And then covertly, Stalin was sending out troops to every Muslim province within the USSR to destroy Tartar history, burn their libraries, kill their people, and completely erase, falsify, and whitewash the history of the Tartarian Empire at that point. And that's where we see the reattribution of buildings like Kazansky Station in Moscow, this beautiful train station, architectural marvel. It's got an astrological clock on it and a Zillant weather vane made of solid gold. And we're told that a Soviet architect built this in 1940 during the upheavals of World War II. It's completely ridiculous. The Soviets were aggressively pushing atheism. They were trying to homogenize the Russian identity. And the idea that they built a clock tower with zodiac symbolism on it is completely insane. So I believe that this all culminated around World War I, World War II, where Tartar history was essentially erased and rewritten.
So did you think that was because Stalin saw Tatarians as a threat to the Soviet?
Well, I mean, absolutely. They wanted to, again, homogenize the Russian identity. They wanted to push atheism and unify the Soviet Union under a single cohesive Russian identity. So I think that was kind of the overarching ideal. But there are other efforts all around the world going on at this very same time. For instance, in the Qing dynasty China, there was still a large amount of Tartar political influence. And actually, we have internal Freemason documents where they were establishing lodges within the Qing dynasty with the stated purpose of overthrowing the last of the Tartar political influence in that region and overthrowing the Qing. And it wasn't just the Masons, it was also other groups like the British East India Company, the Opium Wars. We can get into all of that. But they ended up succeeding in their mission, of course. 1911, there was the Chinese rebellion, overthrowing the Qing dynasty and ushering in a new wave of communism, which lasts to this day.
So Tataria is you would probably categorize it right now as an ancient civilization, right? But it's probably one of the more modern ones than the ones that are generally spoken about, sort of Atlantia and so on and so forth. They're considered way, way, way far back. But this seems, well, from what you've said then, a lot more modern than any of those ones.
Yeah, so from my research, the Sumerians, the Egyptians, the ancient Babylonians, they came before the last Great Reset, before the Great Flood of Noah. And when after the Great Flood, Noah and his sons were tasked with repopulating the earth, and that's where we see the rise of Tartar Khan, Mughal Khan, and eventually the rise of Genghis Khan reuniting these two empires.
Yeah, well, that's kind of insane. So the Tatarians had sort of no connection to these ancient civilizations, which were, let's say, pre-flood.
Well, one commonality that we see with the Tartars and these other ancient civilizations and other civilizations all over the world is actually astrology. We see this encoded into not only, it's well documented that the Sumerians um, you know, practice astrology. We know that the Egyptians practiced some forms of astrology and divination. You can go back as far as Göbekli Tepe, and there's a lot of theories speculating that this could have been some type of astrological instrument. That whole ancient megalithic site, which I don't know if you're familiar with Jimmy Corsetti, but he just recently did a great video exposing how the WEF through the Dogus group is essentially halting all the excavation of that ancient megalithic site. But to answer your question, astrology is one, and the zodiac is a common feature that we see in architecture all around the world. Connects these ancient civilizations to the Tartars, and furthermore, astrology was considered scientific reality up until around the 16th century, when the Catholic Inquisitions really ramped up. Even in Prague, which was well documented to have been Christianized since the early 9th century, they practiced astrology up until the 14th and 15th centuries. They even installed horloge, this beautiful astrological clock with a zodiac ring on it, in 1410. And then I don't think it's a coincidence that 5 years later, in 1415, the Catholic Inquisitions were inside the city walls of Prague, burning heretics at the stakes, leading to the first and second defenestrations. So really, there has been a war on astrology in particular, certain types of astrology, and the skewing of astrology in particular were led down. Anybody who looks into astrology these days, they are led down the path of the common tropical zodiac. So the common tropical zodiac is based on the sun's position where it was 2,000 years ago. So if you think that you're a Taurus, you might actually be an Aries and vice versa. So it's a complete skewing, and I think this is an intentional effort um, stemming from the Catholic Inquisitions that began in the 15th and 16th centuries. I mean, Pope Sixtus V in 1586 formally outlawed astrology throughout all of papal territory, all of the Holy Roman Empire, and any nation that was subjugating themselves to the papal state through paying the Peter Pence. And anybody who defied these orders, they would send legates out to all of these cities and would imprison people, burn people at the stake. And Tartaria was a big force in resisting this kind of centralization of power. It's well documented in a 1590 piece by Lawrence Dekos, which is called "That the Pope is the Antichrist," believe it or not, where the papacy was sending out these legates to the Tartarian emperors, urging them to accept Christ and bow down to papal influence, and to essentially subjugate themselves to the papacy, as many of these other nations throughout the Holy Roman Empire and Europe did. And what they received from the Tartarian emperors was nothing more than a gesture of contempt. So for hundreds and hundreds of years, this empire was spitting in the face of the papacy, the Holy Roman Empire, and the Muscovians, and holding control over these giant swaths of territory throughout Eurasia and the Middle East. And it doesn't make any sense that we still refer to the civilization as a horde of barbarians. That's the common historical narrative when looking at the civilization, but in reality, it's clear that they are much more sophisticated than that. Not only did they have a powerful military and centralized leadership under the various khanates, but we have significant evidence to suggest that they were able to build architecture at scale. They were able to build ramparts, powerful monuments, and they did have a sophisticated culture. Which many referred to as paganism, i.e., astrology. And then you had the Mohammedan Tartars, who were more militant, who were instigating rebellions against the Russian Empire, trying to reestablish their former power throughout the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries, leading up to, of course, World War II, the Bolshevik Revolution, and the genocide of their history and culture.
Do you have a map of the Tataria Empire that you can screen share with us?
Oh, there's plenty of them. Let me see here. Let me see if I can pull some up. It might take me a minute here, Aaron. All right, so here's one. This is Abraham Ortelius's 1570 map. And then we also have, let's see, Jean Parlay's 1754 map. This is probably the most famous of them. So you can see even at this time where Russia has conquered this territory, that the Russian Empire currently is laying claim over this territory, people are still making maps considering Tartaria a nation within the greater empire of Russia. And we also have these flag charts. Like this is what is this called? This is called the Bowles Naval Flag Chart of, let's see, do I have a year on this? I don't think I have a year off the top of my head here, but we can zoom in and we can see clearly the Tartarian Empire is depicted on this flag chart. And then we also have, this is one of the most famous ones too, is the 1865 American Encyclopedia Flags of All Nations section.
What year was that, sorry?
This was 1865.
1865.
Oh, shit.
Okay, wow.
So this is just a handful of them. I mean, we have dozens, if not hundreds of these things. So the evidence is right here, right in front of us. We just need to know where to look and what to look at.
Yeah. Yeah, it does feel a bit, from what I know from it, it does feel a bit weird that Tataria's sort of dismissed so easily, considering like this is 1886, 1865, sorry. That wasn't that long ago to be able to dismiss it today at all.
Well, exactly. And there's other evidence. Let me see if I can pull up the.
So when contemporary historians are asked about these flags and these maps, what is their answer? How do they?
Well, they say it was all a misinterpretation. They say it was cartographers of the time were confused. They used Tartaria as a blanket term to describe this area in northern Eurasia that they hadn't discovered yet, that they hadn't researched yet, that nomadic barbarian tribes were ruling over, which is, completely absurd when you think about it. At this time, you have the great military power of the Holy Roman Empire coming to rise. We have the papacy, we have the Kingdom of England, the Kingdom of France, of Germany, all existing around this time. Yet they hadn't explored and also Columbus had sailed to America in the 1400s, and they're saying that they hadn't even explored this landmass in northern Eurasia, so they just called it Tartaria as a blanket term.
What about the flags? How do they? What's their argument against?
I have yet to see a contemporary historian take a look at these flags and be able to explain them properly.
So what do the historians of, if you're able to find this detail, what do the historians of China say about Tataria? What are they also in conjunction with the Western world?
Well, I think they're very much in conjunction with the Western world because we saw the rise of communism throughout China. We see the Cultural Revolution taking place, destroying artifacts. Are you familiar with the Cultural Revolution in China?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was all these kids who were convinced by the communist government to, I mean, they would even like go so far as to kill their parents for believing in the previous ways. They destroy all these monuments, burn all these buildings and these libraries, these massive book burnings. So I think that's where we see the history of Tartaria and China being destroyed in particular, is during that Cultural Revolution and ultimately leading to the rise of this authoritarian communist regime that is currently in power.
And the scary thing is, you see some of the, like, it's going off topic a little bit. You see some of these things happening in Western culture where I remember during like the BLM riots, they were pulling down loads of statues here in the UK, in London and Bristol, and it's sort of a way like the young people are trying to erase what happened in history.
Well, exactly. I mean, even with the internet and social media shining the greatest spotlight of accountability that has ever existed on the ruling class and these controllers that have been able to get away with this manipulation in the past, they're still trying to get away with it right in front of our faces. I mean, we see this with the January 6th protests turned riot in America during the I think it was 2021 inauguration. You know, they'll tell us, mainstream media will continue to shove this narrative down our throat that it was a legitimate attempt at insurrection, a legitimate attempt at overthrowing the U.S. government. And to me, and to most people looking at that, we can see that's clearly not what that was. It was a protest that turned riot. There was a massive police stand down. There were agent provocateurs in the crowd. Um, so it wasn't an insurrection. There was no, firearms or weaponry. This was clearly not an insurrection, but it makes you wonder what's going to be written in our history books in 50 years. They're going to continue going with this narrative that it was an insurrection. So they're doing it. They're pulling this off right in front of our faces. Imagine what they could have gotten away with 500 years ago before the rise of the internet
Exactly.
and computing. So.
What just to ask a bit about your stories, what got you into researching Tataria?
So it's actually kind of a funny story. Back in late 2022, I was browsing Reddit and I came across this video that had just surfaced where it was in the Church of St. George in Naples, Italy, where this tour guide, had taken this long metal pole and was using it to pull this giant painting off the wall. It swung out like a door, and underneath this giant painting was a giant mural of St. George and the dragon. Are you familiar with that symbol, with St. George stabbing the dragon and killing it? So I remember seeing that and I was scratching my head. I'm like, why did they try to hide this thing? Why was this? Because it was estimated to date back to the 16th century. Why would they try to hide this symbol in particular? It's all over Europe. It's in the English military coat of arms. It's in the Russian imperial flag. It's all over Europe. Why would they try to hide this in this church in Italy? And I search and search and search, and I couldn't find a good answer to my question. So I ended up just putting it down for a while and said, I guess I'm not going to figure out this one right now. Maybe I'll figure it out later on. And it was about a year from there that I stumbled across the Tartaria flag charts that I just showed you and started putting two and two together. I'm thinking there's a black dragon with a curly tail being slain by St. George in this mural, and on these the Russian imperial flag, all these coat of arms all across Europe. And then we see that the symbol of Tartaria is that very same black dragon. It's actually called a zillant. It's a chimera of a griffin, a dragon, and a wyvern. And so I started putting two and two together. I'm thinking this is a symbol of the papacies and the Muscovites conquering over and overthrowing of the Tartarian Empire. That's exactly what that symbol means. And that's why it's displayed so prominently by Putin in Russia, especially during interviews. It's a subtle symbol that's been largely covered up of the Russian Empire's victory over the Tartarians.
I can't, and I don't think I ever will be able to get my head around how something so not something that happened such a short time ago has been able to be covered up now. And then even what Aaron was saying then about stuff that we see today, what's going to happen to that in the next 100 years? And I know we've got the internet, but the further the internet progresses, the more easier it will be for these guys to just mislead us in any other way. I mean, there's stuff that happened pre-internet anyway, and now we've got the internet. It'll be even easier for these guys to dismiss at a click of a few buttons to say, yeah, none of that existed. nothing existed besides what they want us to believe existed.
Well, exactly. It's a double-edged sword, technology is, the internet is, because in some senses, the spread of information is great, but then it also makes it very easy for that information to be controlled in the same respect if we allow them to do it. It's a similar thing with what I say with artificial intelligence, AI, chat GPT. A lot of people are scared of AI, and I think they have a right to be, we should be conscious of the risks of this thing, but doesn't mean that we throw the entire thing out the window. Like any piece of technology, it's a double-edged sword. It can be used for good or for bad. Similar to, atomic energy. I mean, it can be used to provide essentially virtually free, unlimited energy to everybody through nuclear fission or nuclear fusion, which is currently being researched still. But it can also be used to create atomic bombs. So, like any piece of technology, the internet is a double-edged sword.
I was just going to say, but before you talk about Tataria, you said they were decentralized in how they were set up. Did I hear that correctly?
So there were various, the way that I understand it is that there were various khanates within the Tartarian Empire. And then under Genghis Khan and his descendants, Jochi Khan and Batu Khan, there was a great Khan. So Genghis Khan was the great Khan in charge of the other Khans within the Tartarian Empire. It was almost like, I imagine, a system of governors, like a council of Khans that would get together from these various Khanates throughout that made up the Tartarian Empire to essentially decide, what they were going to do to make major military and strategic decisions together. But they were at times united by the Great Khan, and then over time, with these various conquerings, that kind of system started falling apart a little bit, and there were these independent khanates that were still communicating and trying to help each other out. But they, by like 1700, 1800, they weren't united under the Great Khan or the lineage of Genghis Khan any longer.
You also mentioned the year 1918, and that stuck out to me as well because that's around the summertime when Israel was formed.
That's a great point. Yep.
Does that have anything to do with Tartaria from your research?
Well, I believe it does. When you strip an entire ethnic group of their history and cultural origins, I mean, what do you expect to have happen, really? Um, so I think that these historical cover-ups of the past have a profound impact on the national conflicts, these religious conflicts that we see in the Middle East today.
And I guess that's why it's so important that people know about Tataria and people just question what history we're being taught, because, like we've said before, things can be the winner always writes history books, right? So there's a lot of history that we don't know from what we're reading, from what we're being taught at school, or what these contemporary historians are teaching us through documentaries on TV.
Well, absolutely. And, that's the most important point of all, is that he who forgets the past is doomed to repeat it, but he who controls the past controls the future too. So if you can rewrite the historical narrative to eliminate, aggressions that wars of the past or civilizations of the past, if you can skew the historical narrative to your own ends, you can control what not only was happening in the present, but also what is happening in the future as well. So that's why I think it's so important that we understand this history that has been whitewashed and covered up, not just because it's interesting, because it's actually key for us to understand how we move forward from that, how we create a better and more virtuous future. And we can't do that if we don't have all the pieces. I mean, the problem with this research is that it's like we're putting together a puzzle where half the pieces have either been lost or have been intentionally destroyed. So it gets really speculative sometimes, but we kind of need to speculate a little bit because, again, we got to fill in some of these gaps here. And, as more information comes to light, we need to be open to reinterpretation and to change. And we can't just be stuck in our way. Like a lot of people in this community believe in this concept of the one world Tartarians, like the Tartarian Empire. It spanned the world. It built all these beautiful, architectural marvels that we see across civilization today. But I don't personally subscribe to that theory. I don't think the Tartarians conquered the world. I think they were a key player in resisting the centralization of powers. But I think that what we're looking at in the past is a decentralized but sophisticated global civilization that was much more harmonious than the civilization that we see today.
You can see from these, you don't have to go back to ancient civilizations. You just go 200 years ago and see the buildings and structures that they built then. They are way more intricate and detailed and more beautiful to look at than the buildings that we're seeing built today that just seem to be brutal and just built out of efficiency.
Yeah, like the IMP glass boxes,
Yeah.
the skyscrapers that we see all across America today. I mean,
it's not just America, they're all over the world, the exact same buildings. Like you could be in any city in Asia and you feel like you're in the exact same city. Like, I lived in China for a year and all the cities are like pretty much exactly the same. They might have a different tower there that makes the skyline look a little bit different, but once you're on the ground level, they pretty much look the same.
right, and not to say none of modern architecture is beautiful, but I'd say like less than 1% is beautiful in my opinion. And when you look at these structures, these brutalist modern structures, these glass boxes of today, and then you compare that to what was built in the past, I mean, you could just look at it logically and say they had something better going for them than we do today. I mean, these new buildings, they almost seem like they're intentionally designed to demean you, to diminish the human spirit, whereas these old buildings, you walk in them or around them, and it's immediately elevating. It's elevating the human spirit. And I think that that goes beyond just the visual look of these buildings, but also in acoustics as well. I mean, you could see the modern music industry in particular. I mean, it's all controlled by, I mean, there's a reason why, Sam Smith or Taylor Swift is wearing, devil horns and coming out dressed as the devil, and why The Weeknd's having concerts where the word Satan is flashing on a screen behind him. It's bought out and controlled, and this music is made. It sounds kind of woo-woo, but it seems like it's almost made to intentionally keep you in this lower vibrational state, whereas a lot of the music of the past is made to elevate you to be inspirational to people. So I think there's a lot to be said for looking at our past and looking at these beautiful structures. And a lot of people like to, chalk that up. Oh, that was, just slavery that built these, prison labor, whatever. Um, we can't go back to that because, all the suffering was made to occurred in order to create them. But in my opinion, I think there's a lot more to the story than that.
Yeah, because if you look at it as to us now, and if we see a structure like, for example, the pyramids, we would look at it from the only mindset we've got now, and we think the way we're treated when it comes to work and jobs and all that sort of stuff, we see it as menial sort of slavery anyway. So when you look back on the pyramid, you think, oh, the slavery must have been much worse. But then we've not got the same mindset as they had back then on how they conducted work or how they conduct. And if you're saying that they might have been through various different methods, the wavelength they were on must have been a much more positive, higher, nicer one. It might have been something completely different in terms of building these structures than today, because today's just not the same at all.
Well, right. And I want to be 1,000% clear on this. It seems like they had a common purpose that is different from our common purpose today. We don't have a common purpose in our society. What's our common purpose? It's to uh, consolidate resources for ourselves. It's to make money,
Right.
to enhance our
Materialism and
own
consumerism, that's what we
material and consumer. Exactly. And when you look at these buildings, you think that they must have had a different common purpose. It wasn't just to consolidate resources. It was to build something beautiful, to build something of lasting value. And I think that is something that has largely been lost today in our temporary society. I mean, we build things that aren't even made to last a century. We build a skyscraper that's torn down 50 or 60 years after its construction. It's incredibly wasteful, and it's just dumb. It doesn't make any sense. And not to mention that skyscraper that you built 50, 60 years ago. I mean, it's ugly as hell. It's demoralizing to be around things like that. So, you go into New York City, for instance, when I went just a week and a half ago, and you look around and it's like you see the old world and new world right next to each other. You see this beautiful Art Deco skyscraper that's got a Roman pantheon literally built at the top of a clock tower, and then this giant copper finial, super ornate and decorative. And then you contrast that next to this giant glass box skyscraper right next to it. It's like, who's the more advanced civilization here? I think the more advanced civilization was possibly the older one.
Yeah, the ones that use creativity to their benefit rather than today even throughout the education system, we sort of stagnate creativity as soon as possible, so they can go and work in these boxes and not dream of anything else. I guess a good question I've got is, and I know you're not going to have a correct answer for it, but looking into the future, do you see a way back round? Do you think there's loops back into where we can get that creativity? We can all have that shared mindset of a goal or an ambition that we jointly want to get to, and consumerism and materialism sort of declines.
I absolutely do. And we see this mass awakening happening right now. We see a lot of people waking up. This community has gotten a lot more followers and subscribers to it in the recent, just last year or two. And we see this massive pushback of populism in the world, pushing against the forces of evil, the forces of globalization, the forces of the centralization of power. It's becoming more and more exposed than ever. And I think that it's going to lead to, I mean, sure, there's going to be challenges and conflicts. It's not going to be a clean break, but I do see a way back around. As they say in that movie Dune, there's a narrow way through, and I think that's what we're looking at now. And we see a pushback of populism in humanity right now. And not to get too much more into the astrological aspect of it, but also in 2100 AD, right around 2100 AD, our northern axis is going to align with the star Polaris for the first time in 26,000 years. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the precessional cycle. It's something that I've just been starting to look into, but Earth has a you know how Earth's axis is tilted. I might actually be able to pull up a short clip here. All right, let's see. Okay, I got it pulled up here. I'm going to share my screen again if that's all right, guys.
Absolutely.
All right. So we got this video. You can see the the tilt of the Earth. So you know how the Earth spins, of course, but it also, over 26,000 years, or exactly 25,920 years, that spin, the axis also spins. It makes a complete circle in the sky. And this is something I just learned about recently. I'm like, why was I not taught about this in school? The axis creates a complete circle in the sky every 26,000 years. And then it also aligns with various north stars over that period of time. So you can see that circle in the sky, our northern axis is aligning with these various north stars. And we're set to have peak alignment with the star Polaris around 2100 AD. Now, maybe that doesn't mean anything. Maybe I'm just, reading too much into this. But all these other stars we have close passes with, but we have the North Star Polaris that we have perfect alignment with. And this is 2000 AD. It's actually estimated to be more closer to 2100 AD. But we're getting towards peak alignment with this star. And again, maybe it doesn't mean anything, but maybe it does. And we also have the precessional cycle is transitioning from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius around 2160 AD. So that's why in all of this old world architecture, we see symbols of Pisces, the two fish facing apart from one another. We see this in architecture all over the world. I bet you guys can find some in your city in England where you'll see these two fish encoded into the architecture, which is a sign that these buildings were made in the age of Pisces and that we're getting ready to transition into that age of Aquarius. So again, maybe I'm reading too much into this, But I think that we're not only living in a very special place on Earth, but we're living in a very special time to be alive as we approach these transitionary periods. So I think, to answer your question, yes, I'm very hopeful about the future. I think that we're building towards something, and it's up to us to decide whether we want that thing to be great or we, want to go down another path.
So what does the age of Aquarius? What does that mean for humanity?
So it's hard to say. I'm kind of a, a novice astrologer, but essentially, if you look at this cycle here, these dates are all off, by the way. But if you look at this cycle, the sun is depicted right here with that little sign, and you can see. So the age of Aries happened. It started right around the end of the flood of Noah, and then uh, we're basically on the vernal equinox, which is the time of year where there's equal light and dark in the spring. You draw a straight line from Earth through the sun and decide what constellation is directly behind the sun. So we've been living in this age of Pisces since Jesus Christ was born in 0 AD. And then we're going to transition into the age of Aquarius around 2160 AD. Again, these dates are a little bit off here. So it's anybody's best guess what that actually means, what's actually going to happen, if anything's going to happen, if this is even significant at all. But I like to look at the patterns that are literally encoded into the cosmos, that are encoded into the stars, and say maybe there's something more to these. I don't know for certain, but it makes sense to me that the natural cycle of our planet has profound impacts on our planet and the people within it.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I've heard the theory. Well, I've not heard. We know the theory of after a certain amount of time, the Earth itself, the planet itself, goes through a cleanse, and that's what may have been the flood was a cleanse of the planet.
Mhm.
Could that be something that's coming up as well? Another cleanse? Is it time for a cleanse of the planet?
Um, I don't personally think so in terms of like a cataclysm or like a massive flood event again. Um, I mean, if we look at this particular cycle, we see Aries is beginning. Well, this again says 1000 BC. It's actually about 2160 BC, right after the flood of Noah. The age of Aries began, and then we transition to the age of Pisces with the birth of Jesus Christ. I don't know what is going to happen in 2160 BC or 2160 AD, rather, but I do think that we're looking at some massive changes going on our planet. Um, I don't necessarily think that's going to be another cataclysm, but I think that we're looking at some big changes. And I think it's up to us to decide what we want the world to look like and envision a more prosperous, a more virtuous, a more enlightened planet. And we can create that ourselves, but it's really up to us. Nobody's coming down, in my opinion, to save us from ourselves. We need to be the ones instigating this change.
Yeah, yeah. We are the ones to save ourselves. You do hear a lot of people that are relying on something to come down and save us. In my opinion, I've always thought it's good hope to have that sort of to think someone might come down and help us. It's hope, but reality is unless we can save ourselves, you've got to look at it as worst case scenario. No one's coming. No one's going to save us. How do we save ourselves?
Well, exactly. And we see these prophets in the Bible and in the Quran and in the Torah, all these various prophets in Tibetan writings, Buddhism, Hinduism, these prophets do come down from heaven to earth in ancient Sumerian writings, the Anunnaki, the Anak, or Nephilim in the Bible. These intelligent beings coming down, these civilization bringers coming from heaven to earth to provide humanity the knowledge and the tools to build civilization and to lead us uh, into enlightenment and virtue, etc. But in my opinion, I think that change needs to come through us. I don't think that, these beings are going to come down and save us from ourselves. I think if the physical manifestation of Christ were to return and to, lead us or lead us into virtue enlightenment, I think a larger aspect of that is the spiritual return of Christ through humanity, through us, not through any physical being that's going to come down and save us from ourselves.
Yeah, which is probably the best way to look at it. So I know you touched on it before, but when you look at where we are at the moment, and then you start looking into things like artificial intelligence and just a trajectory that we're on and where we're headed to, um, how do you think AI is going to play a role in us sort of sorting out where we're at the moment? Because we're in. I'll just give some background into the question a bit more, but we're in a bit of a problem now where, from what you've discussed as well, is we're all in ultimate control, right? The Western countries, even if you look at a lot of the Eastern countries, we're in a lot of sort of shell shock of control. It seems like the answer is to break out of control and come into a more decentralized system. But when you look at AI and sort of parallel it with what the controls that be, the powers that be, how they handle technology. How do you see us breaking out of this sort of control issue?
Well, I mean, God gave us free will for a reason, right? I mean, it's up to us to decide how we utilize these tools, which again are a double-edged sword. Are we going to use artificial intelligence to bring about a more harmonious, a more virtuous future, or are we going to allow the forces of evil to hijack those tools and that technology to bring about an age of darkness? I mean, it's really up to us to decide how we're going to utilize these tools. I don't think the tools in and of themselves are bad. I mean, people make this argument with gun control all the time. I mean, it's not the gun that kills somebody, it's the shooter. And I think that same principle goes with AI as well. It's up to us to make AI good, to use it for the right reasons, rather than using it for the forces of evil, deception, and control.
Yeah, right. I did hear on a podcast the other day. It's like, well, if you put us back to caveman times of what we know about, and look at if the way they would have progressed would have been through language, through symbolism, and so on and so forth, and they wouldn't have questioned that use of technology, as in language and symbolism. But where that got us today was control, but they wouldn't have questioned it because they always want to try and push themselves to do better and do better and do better. And that's what we are as humans right now is like AI's come in, technology's come in, we just want to do better. We want to progress more, we want to become more advanced, more, we want to live longer. That's all of our goals. Um, so that's like what we're all sort of rushing to, and the consequences sort of come after. That's the sort of mindset that we have as human beings.
Well, it's a really important point because we have these systems of control that are sort of in charge of us, but I don't think the other side of that is the right answer either. A lot of people like to think in these black and white terms, Republican versus Democrat, black versus white, or they like to think freedom or tyranny. But I think it's like Thomas Paine said in his, I think it was in the 17th century or early 18th century, in his book Common Sense. We need to exercise a degree of common sense when it comes to this stuff. There's always going to be a push-pull between, anarchy and tyranny, but we shouldn't gravitate towards one of the two extremes. We need to use common sense. Government is an evil, but it's a necessary evil, and we need to, make sure that we're using the right checks and balances. We're actually utilizing the checks and balances in order to control this ascension or descension into uh, virtue or darkness. Now, the other aspect of that is if you were to, for instance, um, if civilization were to, collapse, if we were to go back in caveman days, like you were saying, I mean, it obviously wouldn't be a good thing. And we have these people, I know people myself who fetishize like nuclear apocalypse. The media is doing it all over the time, all over movies and TV shows. I mean, The Walking Dead, we have Blade Runner, Mad Max. We have all these dystopian movies and literature that everybody's so into reading. It's almost like it's preparing our mindset. We're manifesting this dark, disgusting future for ourselves rather than manifesting something like Star Trek, where we're going to ultimately create a better civilization for ourselves. So I think we need to start getting back gravitating away from these more dystopian Brave New World 1984 type mindset, and we need to start gravitating towards the principles of freedom, of liberty, of justice, and looking ahead and trying to manifest a brighter future for humanity rather than thinking that everything's going to collapse and I can't wait for the nuclear Armageddon to begin because I got my bunker and I'm going to survive. It's like, no, nobody really does well if there's, nuclear war. Nobody wins. Okay. Even if you have a bunker and you're prepared for that, nobody's actually prepared. So, I mean, it just is shocking to me sometimes when I see people who are romanticizing this idea of Armageddon. I mean, you should always prepare for the worst, but you need to hope for the best at the same time, in my view.
Yeah, the media is kind of I 100% agree with you. When you look at all of these dystopian things, it glamorizes it, makes it seem sexy that the world's going to come close to end. But it's not even just with that. It's like you see so many people loving these crime documentaries and these serial killer documentaries that they're glamorized. They're sort of seen as heroes in the most backwards, sort of weirdest way ever. These serial killers, or whatever, they're all seen as heroes, but because you're only consuming it as a fantasy bit of entertainment, whereas that is reality as we're seeing it today. That's a story of reality as we've seen it today. Shouldn't be glamorized, but yet Netflix put it into a 4-part documentary and sell it to you as it's something spectacular and amazing to watch. But then if you was to put something up about, even if you was to put a 4-part documentary up about Tataria, that's not going to get the same reception as a serial killer that does weird things with his victims. It's just not the way that people have been tuned into it.
Yeah, like Dexter, like he's the protagonist, but he's like dissecting people. It's like so weird. It's such a perversion. So it's not to say you shouldn't be aware of these things, so that you should blind yourself to evil. I think you need to be aware of these evil things, but I think that our media and our society is again fetishizing these things and making it seem, like you said, Cam, like it's this great sexy thing that, these either serial killers, like, or they are calling, what they're calling Charles Manson hot or something, like they're saying like he's like the handsomest serial killer. It's like, what is going on here? So I think that we're starting to see it, and we need to see it more, where it's a shift back towards goodness and prosperity, and manifesting a brighter future for humanity rather than this doom and gloom thinking that everything's going to fall apart tomorrow.
Hmm. Yeah, me and Aaron speak about it all the time on the podcast, and we both, well, I certainly do believe it. Like the world needs to have a sense of balance, and when you're looking at the media and entertainment, and I categorize Netflix within the media because it's all sort of media created stuff, propaganda. There's no balance in it. It's all sort of one-sided. Everything's gone crazy. If you look at the news, the world's falling to pieces. But in reality, if you actually go outside and talk to people, the world's okay. It's not. We're not in a state of crisis right now at all.
Yeah, I think people that spend too much time on the internet they have a warped sense of actual reality. When I feel like sometimes you just need to go out and have a chat with someone, and you realize actually it's not as crazy as the internet's making it seem.
Right, and that's an intentional effort by these social media companies who are constantly feeding you this crap.
Mm. Because I was listening to a podcast today on YouTube, and he had like quite a motivational speaker on it, and she was just talking about how she's become successful. And he said on the podcast, the guy presenting it, he said, "Oh, I get a lot of comments saying my podcasts are always doom and gloom," but he said that's what you guys click on. So,
Well, exactly.
yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? Or is it what YouTube push in our algorithm?
That's what people click,
Then,
and then
yeah, then they're going to push what people click. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems that way, and it's a sign of a very sick society, in my opinion. I mean, there's definitely good aspects of it. Like you said, you can go outside and you can talk to people, and you'll meet great folks, and there's a lot of hope. There is a lot of hope. Um, but there are, evil forces that are trying to pull us down, and I think we need to be aware of them. We need to push back and fight against them, and we need to be aware that these social media companies are oftentimes pushing you crap. Like, it's funny. I watched this guy, John Levi. Have you heard of John Levi on YouTube? He makes a lot of Tartaria content. And, I'll watch his videos, and then YouTube has this autoplay feature where instead of playing another one of his videos, when his video ends, it like directs me to a NASA documentary. It's like, that is not what I was looking to watch at all. So it's like, it's a purposeful effort to lead you down, or lead you either away from something that is real, that is true. I'm trying to lead you away from that, or continue leading you down a rabbit hole that is
Yeah.
sick.
I agree with that because I think YouTube identified. I think back, what are we 24 now? Maybe back in the when YouTube, so not when it first came around, but when it first became popular, it was the hub of genuine rabbit holes. You would click on a video and you would find yourself flying down this iceberg of craziness. And I think, obviously, they've identified it and been like, well, if they're all coming to YouTube for rabbit holes, we can steer them down the rabbit hole that we want them to see, rather
Right,
than
right.
these. Because I remember when I first started going on YouTube, I was going down some crazy, crazy rabbit holes. But now that you really have to go out your way to find the truth on
Mm.
YouTube,
Yeah,
is
you used to be able to watch a video and the recommended videos at the side are actually related to that video, and
yeah, exactly.
they would just take you on a deeper rabbit hole. But now it's just a lot of that mainstream media junk on the side. I
Yeah,
don't even watch it anymore.
Yeah, the autoplay is a big thing. It's like any of these channels that I watch, the video ends and it directs me into like a completely different topic that I wasn't even interested in. So it's clear as day that there's a purposeful effort, and that's why I appreciate, you could say what you want about Elon Musk. I think he's done some bad things, he's done some good things. But man, him buying out X was such a big push in the right direction, in my opinion. There obviously are some horrible, horrible rabbit holes that you could go down to on X, like with the Trump assassination attempt. They say, oh, it's all a stage, it's fake blood, all that kind of stuff, and you're like, well, that's kind of crazy. I think this is kind of a tough thing to fake, but it's at least not pushing you intentionally towards this crap, towards this propaganda. And that's what all these other social media platforms are doing. Instagram, in particular, my wife sent me this Instagram the other day where it was a woman who was talking about, I forget exactly what it was, but it's some relationship thing with her husband. And I go in the comment section, and the top three comments are these guys saying, oh, this woman's wrong for such and such a reason. And then she's like, those are completely different comments from the top comments on the post on my phone. I look on her phone, and it's all these women at the top talking about how these the woman talking was right to be talking
Wow.
bad about her husband there. So it's really weird. They're getting very sophisticated about how they're trying to push this propaganda towards you. They're even recognizing your gender on Instagram and pushing certain comments to the top for you when you think that these are just, oh, these are the most popular comments, these are the most liked comments. No, these comments are specifically curated to you, your interests, your age group, and your gender. It's wild.
And that warps your mind and makes you think what you're thinking is actually popular, and there's a lot more people out there that think it.
Exactly. It's all an echo chamber.
Mm. So then you're gonna, because you're seeing other people validating what you're thinking, you're gonna think it even stronger, or might go even more extreme with your views, and then it could send you down
Well,
a.
then your wife is, if she's read her comment, she's going to go stronger into them
Yeah.
views. And then when you two come to discuss that shared topic, you're going to have completely different views, but you both believe in your view so much because you're like, well, everyone else backs me up on Instagram, so I'm right. And then well, it's just dividing it. It's just completely dividing it.
It's divide and conquer. I mean, that's exactly what it is, in its purest form. You can see it's plain as day. So they've done this for literally centuries. and now they're doing it through the internet and social media. So they're driving people to the worst extremes possible to create conflict, to create the conditions for collapse. And this is why, kind of going back to what we were saying, collapse is not good for anybody, no matter what people say. Oh, I wish we need to. I hear people say all the time, we need to tear down this whole system and rebuild it from scratch. No, no, we do not want to do that. That is going to cause chaos. It's going to cause Armageddon. That's good for nobody except for these controllers who want to swoop in on the chaos and capitalize on it. We see it happen all over the Middle East with this regime change crap, where particularly if you look at Libya, are familiar with the Libya conflict and the Arab Spring in around 2011? So Muammar Gaddafi, good guy, bad guy, whatever. I mean, he's a conflicted guy, but the fact of the matter is, under his regime, Libya had running water and electricity throughout the entire country, and he was going to issue this gold-backed dinar to compete with the USD. And then we see drone strikes. We see U.S. intelligence agencies funding the Islamic Caliphate to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi, and now it's a complete hellhole. It's a complete hellhole in that country. So you can't look at that conflict and say that Libya is better off now than it was, back under his regime. We've lost the moral high ground to say that we need to democratize these nations all over the world. We like to think that democracy is this inherently good prospect, that it's this inherently good thing. I think that it works for some societies. It's clearly not really working for ours right now. I mean, our entire Congress is bought out by corporations. We live in a corporatocracy, in my opinion. But some societies function very well under kingdoms, under dictatorships, and it's all really subjective. And it just depends on what leadership structure is working. You can have good leaders, you can have bad leaders, you can have a good democracy, you can have a corrupt and hijacked democracy, as I believe that we do in the United States right now.
Because I don't think a political system should be enforced on any country. It should be, if America had democracy, if democracy, it might take the other countries a while to follow suit, but if that's working well in America and continues to work well for hundreds of years, then other countries would be, their people in those countries who aren't happy would rise up and then potentially implement democracy within the country if democracy works in America, or they can see a country where democracy is leading by example.
Well, exactly. And it just, there's so many cases of this. You can look at Libya, you can look at Iraq before and after. Baghdad is completely demolished. Egypt tried to overthrow their president during the Arab Spring, but they ended up, U.S. intelligence coup put, what's his name? The current guy who's in there, he was a military general. I forget his name off the top of my head, but and then you look at Russia in particular. People say, "Oh, we need to get Putin out of there." It's like, well, I'm no Putin lover. I live in the United States. I love America. I don't love Russia. But imagine what would happen if Putin was overthrown, if he was killed or assassinated or overthrown in some respect. We know what's going to happen. It's going to be chaos. It's going to create another one of these power vacuums that the most elite members of our society are going to swoop in and capitalize off of, to the detriment of everybody else living in that region. So we've completely destabilized the world. We've destroyed the Middle East, and all in the name of liberty and democracy. Give me a break. Give me a break.
It seems to it contradicts what they're going there to bring to the country.
Oh, absolutely. It's all a guise. It's all a guise. I mean, there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We all knew this. 9/11, in my opinion, was largely a false flag operation. Not saying that obviously people died, but I mean, if you look at that with, from coming from a logical stance, you look at those buildings collapsing, clearly a controlled demolition. Trade Center 7, never hit by anything, collapses into its own footprint. I mean, clear as day that there was more to the story than what we're being told. And then we use that as the rationale to invade Afghanistan and then invade Iraq, which had literally zero to do with it. And we kill 500,000 women and children. I mean, and then you look at, it goes back to the Gulf of Tonkin for the prerequisite to the Vietnam War. Operation Northwoods under JFK, probably one of the main reasons why JFK was killed is because the Joint Chiefs of Staff presented him this plan that they're going to blow up American jetliners, kill Cuban friendlies, and actually kill people. I mean, it was very evil in order to, as the prerequisite, as the rationale to invade Cuba. And then you can even go back, even in World War II, there's some evidence to suggest that Roosevelt had foreknowledge of the attack on Pearl Harbor. I mean, we knew that the Japanese were going after Pearl Harbor months before we had intercepted a communication. The Navy had intercepted communication that the Japanese were planning on attacking Pearl Harbor at some time in the next year. And we knew that several months before it actually happened. So,
but he wanted it to, or he let it go ahead so the US could get involved with World War II. Is that correct?
I mean, I don't know anything for certain. You know, I think anybody can look into these matters and come to their own conclusion. But I think that, I mean, obviously Pearl Harbor was the prerequisite to us dropping the A bombs on Japan and leading to D-Day and everything else, and also leading to our alliance with the Soviet Union, which circles back to Tartaria. The reason why the document National Cultural Development under Communism was published in 1957 and then immediately classified by the U.S. intelligence agencies, not to be declassified until 50 years later in August of 1999. I mean, we are literally aiding and abetting the Soviet communists in the genocide of the Tartars and the destruction of their history just by classifying that document. Why is the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency collaborating with the Soviet Union in order to cover up this genocide? It makes no sense unless you know the truth about this history and understand that there's a larger game at play here. So again, I don't know anything for sure about Pearl Harbor or the prerequisites there. But I do know that the world went through some massive changes during World War I and World War II, and our history has been falsified in many respects. I'm not saying everything's wrong, but a lot of stuff has been skewed. I mean, they try to keep things consistent by lying or twisting the truth as little as they possibly can, but then you can catch them in these lies and in these little bits of deception. Like, for instance, contemporary scholars will tell us that Sumbeka Tower in Kazan, in the Kazan Kremlin complex, was built by Ivan the Fourth's architects in just a week's time after he conquered the city of Kazan. And you're like, that doesn't make any sense that they built this giant brick tower in a week. This was clearly built by the previous empire, the Tartarian Empire, that had already existed in this region for hundreds and hundreds of years. So yeah, I think World War I and World War II was a big transitionary period for our planet, and a lot of history was written by the victors during that time. Let's just put it that way.
Well, the chaotic thing is right is that we're given what we're taught, which is one part of history, albeit very twisted. And then us as just general people have got to then look at all the other evidence that's around and try and connect the dots. That's a big job. And it's definitely a big job to connect all of them dots when we're being sort of pushed back by the powers that be, the media, everyone else, even your general sort of person that tunes into news at night, they're pushing back. And we've got to, this is what, from my experience of just doing this podcast and talking to people, is there's massive amounts of information and evidence out there, but it's trying to connect those people together to be able to connect them dots is next to an impossible task because YouTube is shutting down every single channel that they possibly can, and it's stopping anyone from getting any sort of publicity to be able to have them. Just them come. We're not allowed to. This conversation technically isn't allowed, and could run the risk of being shut down just from having this conversation with you, which is wild.
Well, it is wild, and there's one other point I want to make, and I'll be careful about how I state it, just so we can avoid some of those censors. But the Axis powers during World War II, how they're called the Axis powers versus the Allies. Remember when we talked about astrology before, and Earth's northern axis aligning with the star Polaris around 2100 AD? So if you look at the North Star in the sky, if you identify Polaris, you'll notice the Big Dipper. It rotates around. It rotates around the North Star with the seasons, with the 365-day cycle. So there are 4 different seasons each creating a hub of that North Star in the middle, which makes up the German symbol during World War II. We won't say the name of it. And it's very fascinating to me. Again, the Axis powers, that symbol aligning with the North Star Polaris and the Big Dipper rotating around it with the seasons. Very, very intriguing. And again, I'm not I'm not making any sort of weird argument here. Don't take my words out of context. What I'm saying is that during World War II, we chose the lesser of two evils with the communists. We let them run rampant with the historical narrative in their own country. We actively aided and abetted them in covering up Tartarian history. There's clearly more to the story here. History's not so black and white. It's a lot more nuanced than we like to perceive it.
Because I know. I don't know if you. I'll just say Hitler.
I think it is hard to.
I don't know. Can you say?
Because it's.
Yeah. He had an interest in Hinduism, from what I've read, and the occultism.
Yes, he was obsessed with Hinduism, the occult, astrology, all of it.
Yeah. So I've always it's hard to find like a definite answer what his obsession, why he was so obsessed with it, and what his actual goals and objectives were. Do you have any understanding on that?
I mean, Hitler was a bad guy, obviously. I mean, he hijacked that symbol, made it evil, but this symbol had been used for thousands of years by previous civilizations. And there's a reason for that, even before, because we didn't actually start aligning with the star Polaris until around 500 AD. So these ancient civilizations that were using the symbol, they had foreknowledge that this alignment was going to occur right around 2100 AD. And that may have been part of why Hitler used that symbol in the first place, is because he recognized that alignment was occurring. I don't have any real information to support that. He has made no speeches saying that. Towards the end of his regime, he was trying to crack down on astrology throughout Germany. But yeah, again, they were obsessed with the occult. Have you ever seen Raiders of the Lost Ark with
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, with Indiana Jones? I mean, they really were trying to find the Ark of the Covenant. They were going and trying to dig up all these ancient megaliths to find all these ancient symbols, these ancient artifacts, and try to use them. For what reason? I don't exactly know, but it's just very interesting to recognize and to understand that there may be more to this symbolism than we make it out to be. We like to take that symbol and just throw in a bucket of evil, can never be used again, but it may actually, excuse me, be more to the story than what we're told.
Yeah, but my grandma, me and Cam are brothers, and
Really?
Our grandma's a Hindu, and she had that the sign on her door, but obviously not tilted. It was like
Yeah.
straight, yeah. When people used to come around and they didn't know what it was, they would be like asking them, "Why have you got that on your door?"
Yeah, no, that. I've done a lot of research into Nazi Germany, to the point where I even read his autobiography, and it was a hard read because you start relating to him because he sort of explains the problems that are arising in the world, and it gets to a point where it's like you got to remember who he is. But there's this sort of burning desire to think I've still got it now, is what led him. I understand the troubles he went through. I understand the troubles that he had identified with the world, but what led him to then become the evil sort of monster that he was? Because to me, it does seem more than just he was a good talker. He was good at doing speeches, and the power got to his head, which are sort of the three things. Whenever I explain that to anyone, I sort of get told. But to me, it's a lot more. There's a lot more to it than that, than just him being a good talker, getting a lot of power, and a lot of power coming to his head. It seems like there was more knowledge that he possessed, which is really weird way of looking at it, but that's just the way I look at it.
Well, absolutely. And you got to remember after World War One, Germany was owed reparations to the rest of Europe. And part of that was to allow a certain amount of unmitigated migration or immigration into the nation of Germany. So there was all these people coming in. We won't say exactly where they're from, but there are all these people coming in, and and Germany was essentially saying we can't support this many people coming in. We're already, dying. We have hyperinflation everywhere. And at the time, these other nations in Europe weren't willing to accept these migrants. Germany actually, there's a famous case where a boat full of 2,000 migrants were sent to Ellis Island, America, and they were turned away during this time frame. So all these other nations are saying, okay, well, we'll let them in, but you got to pay us a certain amount per head to cross into our country. So it's a little, again, a little more nuanced than I think a lot of contemporary historians make it out to be, that it was purely good versus evil. Again, there was a lot of evil things done, a lot of inexcusable things that were done during that conflict. But I don't think it's as black and white as a lot of scholars make it out to be these days.
Yeah. The worrying thing with what you've just said and with what sort of I found out when I was looking into him a bit deeper is a lot of the problems seem to be happening today with the Western countries, the global superpowers that be. A lot of them same issues are arising today, and it almost feels like are we one guy, literally one person away from experiencing the same thing that happened back then?
I don't personally believe so, because I think more people are seeing through the propaganda than ever. I think this divide and conquer tactic is failing. I think humanity is coming together and realizing it doesn't matter what race, religion, color, ethnic group you're a part of. Um, we all want the same thing. We want prosperity. We want peace. We want virtue. And these global elite, these rulers, these controllers are really the source of the problem. And it doesn't matter. They're not all from one particular place or from one particular ethnic group. There's a coordinated effort between the most powerful people on our planet, the Bilderberg group types, the Bohemian Grove types. Bohemian, man, I can't say that word. Bohemian Grove. By the way, have you guys seen the new footage from Bohemian Grove that just
No,
came out?
No.
Yeah, it's like HD footage. You'll have to check it out after this
really?
pod. Yeah, somebody went in there like a week ago and got HD footage of
Yeah.
the most recent Bohemian Grove festivities, the cremation of care and all that fun stuff. But
I love seeing that stuff. We had a guy on the podcast that was showing us what was that book called?
A yearbook from the Bohemian Grove. I don't know what year it was from, but he was showing us for each page.
It was it was amazing.
very interesting. But I went on a tangent there. I don't know what point I was trying to make there.
Yeah, well, yeah, about the global superpowers. Well, the scary thing is like the World Economic Forum. I know it goes deeper than just the World Economic Forum, and that's sort of what we see. But then we just had our elections here in the UK, and the basic choice we were given was Conservative and Labour, which were both run by two World Economic Forum members. So it's like, who do you even, where do you
The
even go
illusion
from
of choice, right?
Yeah.
We're the same way in America. It's been that way for a very long time, unfortunately. Probably since, again, World War One and World War Two, when we got off the gold standard, the Federal Reserve was established, the um, what is it called? The General Education Board was established, the corporate takeover of the American school system. So I think that is when that transition happened. I think JFK was actually our last true president who wasn't bought and sold by these corporations, who was actually trying to go out on his own and do good and to bring about prosperity and peace. And he was obviously taken out by the powers that be. And we may be seeing somewhat of a repeat of that with the Trump presidency and his recent assassination attempt. I disagree with Trump on a lot of things. Um, he's been very vocally supportive of Israel, which I don't hate Israel, but I also acknowledge that there has been some horrendous things that have come to pass in the last 6 to 12 months here. So I think that a more balanced stance there might is my view on that matter. I don't think that we should be so pro. But here's the deal with him: is that under his administration, we didn't have any new wars. We didn't have this situation going on in Israel and Gaza. We didn't have Russia invading Ukraine. We didn't have China on Taiwan's doorstep. We had these leaders in line. There was peace, relatively speaking, and I think that it's as clear as day what has happened under the current administration and how far that we've fallen. So even though he's not my favorite choice, and I do disagree with him a lot of stuff, these COVID lockdowns and all the other stuff that happened, when you just look at foreign policy in particular and you take into account the fact that no new wars were started under him, it's hard to not support the guy
Yeah.
personally.
No, I agree because he was. You've got Joe Biden and you've got Donald Trump, who are both different types of crazy. But the problem that I see with Joe Biden is he's seen as like a cowardly crazy. He's crazy in the sense that he's cowardly. He's not a leader, whereas Donald Trump's on the other end of the spectrum completely. That he's crazy in the terms that he's actually mad. So the fear was what led these other countries to sort of stay in line to think, I'm not going to piss around today because Donald Trump might just blow the country or whatever. But you don't have that same feeling when it comes to Joe Biden. You sort of feel like, he'll be all right. He might forget about it in the morning.
Well, I mean, you got to have a strong leader, somebody who has a powerful aura to them at least. And when you look at, Joe Biden, you don't get that. I mean, clearly. I mean, he's seen. I've been saying it for years. I remember back before even 2020, I was telling my uncle, he's a very smart guy. I was like, the guy's senile. I mean, everybody can see. He's like, I see no evidence of that. And then 4 years later, he's dropping out of the race due to him, having dementia. So it's a real problem that we have with our current political establishment, and that most of these people are just puppets. I mean, now Kamala is going to be our new leader. I mean, come on. These people are clearly they're all bought and sold by corporations. And this is what I've learned about Congress and the presidency throughout the last few years is I'm looking at their donations, and most of them are funded by the exact same people. They're all funded by the exact same military contractors. It's just, again, it's the illusion of choice. Everybody in our political system is bought and sold, and the only real solution is to actually get money out of politics, which is easier said than done. But it's really whose campaign has the most funding has a huge advantage over the other candidate, even if their ideas are superior. Because you can just blast people with propaganda and they'll believe it. Because half the country is mindless zombies who scroll Instagram all day.
Yeah, well, I would say even probably more than half. Definitely in the UK, it's crazy.
So, do you think the attempted Trump assassination was um, a deep state attack, or do you think it was just genuinely some guy?
I think that it was at the very least incompetence. And, you always hear the term you shouldn't attribute malice where incompetence can be attributed. But I mean, it seems so blatantly incompetent that it seems almost like a setup. I'm not saying that this guy knew that he was like part of the deep state and he was going to go up there, but it seems like they intentionally left that roof open. And a guy walks a mile with a 12-foot ladder and an assault rifle over his shoulder, and the Secret Service doesn't see him. I mean, it's completely insane. And now we have the director of the Secret Service on the congressional stand, and she's given these little half answers where she's saying, "Oh, I'll have to get back to you on that," or "We're still researching that." It's like you left a roof open 150 feet from the president with a clear shot to the guy. I personally err on the side that I think this was at least partially an inside job, that they knew that something could happen and they purposely allowed it to happen. That's just my opinion. Everybody's welcome to have their own opinion. We have the Blue Anon people who think that it was all just a staged attack and that it's fake blood and that this was all just to rally around Trump as the strong man. But again, it seems like a super hard thing to fake.
But yeah, if
I
you
mean, there's
actually
a
look at the
guy got
footage of
his
the
head blown
shot,
off.
yeah, it's insane.
Yeah, like 1 centimeter that way, and his head's gone.
Exactly. And like people actually died there, which doesn't mean that you shouldn't be able to question it. I believe in free speech, and I believe people should be able to question national tragedies and events like this. But I personally think that this would be a very, very difficult thing to fake. And I don't think personally this was a fake. I think this was a setup, a purposeful lapse of judgment, a purposeful lapse in securing this perimeter in order to allow this shooter to get a clear shot on President Trump.
It must be if they allowed it to go ahead and it was maybe not intentionally set up, but set up as in they just left that roof free for somebody to come and do what they did. They must be worried that Trump's going to do something when he's in power that they're not going to like. Because for the past year or so, they've been trying to put him in prison.
Well, exactly. If demeaning his name doesn't work, if trying to put him in prison doesn't work, what's the next logical step? It's assassination. And they're going to keep trying to assassinate him. I mean, who knows if the guy's going to even be alive? I hate to say it, by inauguration day. I mean, they are going to continue trying to take him out. And I truly believe that. And I think that he has to realize that the Secret Service doesn't have his back anymore and probably get some, I don't know, private security or something to help secure his rallies in the future if he decides to move forward and have them.
Mm. I can see him still wanting to go ahead and have the rallies. He loves it.
Oh yeah, he loves
It's
the rallies.
that assassination attempt has definitely fed his ego. The fact
Oh
that he
my God,
survived
yeah.
it, which is crazy to me.
Some pretty cool photos came from it as well.
Yeah, yeah. So I can kind of see why people think, oh, it's all staged because he got such a cool photo. But man, I don't know. That seems like such a difficult thing to fake to me.
Yeah, that's a marketing genius if they did fake that. But equally, like what you were just saying, it just seems a lot more sort of believable that they've sort of propagandized this person into thinking he is able to try and assassinate Trump, which takes and then leave it to think, oh, it's just something that Trump set up. It's just easy to do.
You can't fake a bullet. There's a picture of the bullet. Maybe it's Photoshop, but there's a picture of the bullet whizzing right behind his head.
Oh yeah, I saw that. Yeah, that's a crazy photo.
And then the guy's Discord, that guy had a Discord account, and Discord immediately deleted it and said, we already looked at it. There's nothing on there. It's like, huh, that's a little bit suspicious. I wonder if somebody was talking to him. I wonder if he was having some conversations over Discord.
Yeah, with Kamala Harris.
Yeah, maybe with Kamala and Joe.
I don't think Joe knows how to turn the computer.
Yeah, I don't think so either. What else, guys? You want to wrap it up, or
we can keep going if you. Well, I can keep going if you can.
Yeah, we'll keep going because I got a question. I saw one of your videos. I didn't watch it, but it's about Mount Rushmore, and I want to know.
Oh yeah, that's a fun
I watched
one.
at the beginning of it before you came on, and you're basically saying it wasn't built by who we thought it was built by.
Well, here's the deal. I don't know exactly who built Mount Rushmore, but I do know that the Navajo tribe that was in that area, or I can't remember if it was the Navajo or the Lakota Sioux tribe. One of the tribes, they called that mountain before as Mount Rushmore. They called it the Mountain of the Six Grandfathers, which I found really suspicious that we decided to carve the faces of 4 old guys into that was that was originally called the Mountain of the Six Grandfathers. And then you can look at the construction photos of the thing and you see that there's like another face they say was supposed to be Jefferson, but they messed it up. But the face has like a beard on it and it kind of looks like Merlin or something. So there's a lot of anomalies with that. And again, would be a really hard thing to fake. But I mean, you look at, Teddy Roosevelt, And you look at some of his background, he was famously a 33rd degree Freemason, and he was involved in some other secret societies like Skull and Bones. And you have to wonder, you're like, maybe he could have masked his appearance. He could have, gotten glasses and grown the mustache, for the purpose of appearing like this person on Mount Rushmore. Which, by the way, if you look at the nose and the jawline, it doesn't look anything like him, like the real person, Teddy Roosevelt. So. I find it very suspicious. And then you also look at the history of, the Navajo talk about the four worlds creation myth, how there were advanced civilizations on Earth that were destroyed by cataclysms repeatedly, which aligns perfectly with the things we talk about with the Younger Dryas impact theory or the Tartarian mud flood theory. So, there's all these ancient civilizations all over the world who have the same common theme of there being a great flood that destroyed a previous civilization, and civilization was born anew. So, and if you look at the Native Americans, there's a lot of different ideas on where these people originally came from. I've seen some writings that say the Native Americans came over the Bering Land Strait. They were part of the ancient Tartars who migrated by foot over the Bering Land Strait to inhabit North America. And then we get it. We can get into the Vikings too. The which I need to do more research on personally. The Vikings were another thought about who may have constructed some of these buildings, or Mount Rushmore in particular.
The
But
Vikings.
Wow.
yes, yeah. So one thing that I found particularly interesting, which again, I need to do more heavy research into this topic, but John Levi was pointing out in one of his videos that the Vikings, the word Viking, it's VI, which in Roman numerals means six, and then kings. So Vikings could have meant the six kings. So that's a theory that I'm looking to explore in future explorations. But I don't have all the answers on Mount Rushmore. I wish I did, but I do know that there is a hidden hallway called a Hall of Records that you're no longer able to explore anymore, that the architect of Mount Rushmore, Gutzon Borglum, supposedly started building, but then he ran out of funding, so he couldn't finish it. And then you look at pictures of it. Again, you're not able to explore it today. You look at pictures of it, and it looks like a tunnel system that has been filled in with rubble. So it makes me wonder, is there actually a intricate tunnel system within Mount Rushmore that's being hidden from us?
Mm.
In that film, I don't know if you have you seen it, Richie Rich.
I haven't seen that one. What's it about?
It's what's that kid from Home Alone called?
Oh
Kevin. Not
man,
Kevin. That's his name in the film.
Um, meh.
Yeah, but
Macaulay
it's
Culkin or something?
Macaulay
yeah,
Culkin.
it's a kids film. I remember watching it when I was a child. This is why I can't recall it properly, but I remember Mount Rushmore being in it. I'm pretty sure there's like a building behind it that they go in for a tunnel.
Yeah, there's a lot of that stuff, like that hidden symbolism that's encoded into our media. And it makes me wonder whether it's a purposeful thing, like they're just kind of putting the truth in plain sight, or if it's just a subconscious thing that, we've gotten from our ancestors, these ideas that just come out in our writings, in our media, in our creative works. Like Star Trek has a plethora of examples like that too.
Yeah, they're all over the place. But then I don't know, because the further along the line we get and the more information we find out, we just seem like either hidden in plain sight, or it's a bit of a inside joke for them to release this information and laugh at us.
Right, right. It almost seems that way. I've heard some theories about karma and how they like need to put things in plain sight for us to get, or otherwise they'll get, sniped down by God or something, because or by the karmic cycle, because but if they're telling you what they're doing as they're doing it, then they don't have to deal with that karmic retribution cycle.
Yeah, then they're off the hook, so to speak. Yeah, I've heard that as well. It's weird when you look at it from the sense that like independent movies, or sort of low budget movies, ones that shouldn't sort of get through the cycle, sort of and they do well, don't really have any of this stuff in. It's only the really successful Hollywood actors or sort of people that are featured in these movies that you're sort of watching, and it's stuff that they've forcefully put in front of you. You've not chosen to like that movie. You've been told this is a good movie and you will like this movie. And it's them sort of movies. Same with music. It's like what you're saying about Sam Smith and Taylor. Taylor Swift's a prime example because her music's not very good, but yet if you speak to your sort of general person, she's the best um, singer that's ever lived. But it's not. She's just been manufactured and put in front of you, and you've been told she is the greatest. And then, like, what 70% of people say, "Oh, if you're saying so, then I don't want to feel like an idiot by saying she's not."
Well, music is so powerful, and I think people underestimate that. I mean, I think that's part of the reason why in a lot of these old world buildings, we see in the rose windows in particular, cymatic patterns encoded literally into the stonework. That's why there's all of these giant pipe organs within these cathedrals and the bell towers on top and the spires. I think we vastly underestimate the power that music has over the human mind and over the influence of our actions in particular. For instance, if you go to a heavy metal concert, right, or a death metal concert, people form mosh pits. It's just a natural thing. People form mosh pits and beat the shit out of each other for no reason. Just because it's like the influence of the music, it is like a spell being cast over them. They're like, we're going to form a pit and start kicking each other in the face. You never see that happen at like a classical music orchestra, and there's a reason for that. It's because the music is casting a spell on you. It's putting you in a lower vibration that is putting you in that state. And that's why when we see people like Ice Cube coming out on Tucker Carlson saying that yes, the CIA was infiltrating the rap music industry in the 90s and making it more and more violent, try to influence a lot of these young kids to go out and gangbang to perpetuate the prison industrial complex. And furthermore, when we look at the Pentagon, we notice, oh, they have like a multi-billion-dollar budget for movies and for media, like Top Gun in the 1970s. They funded the crap out of that movie. And then they reap the reward of all these kids coming in with this romanticized vision of what being in the military or being in the Air Force would be. And they're all ready to sign up voluntarily for this, for these wars. And I think they hoped the same thing would happen with the latest Top Gun movie, which they didn't get the same result. But it just goes to show, and they probably have a video game budget as well, you know,
Call of
with Call of
Duty.
Duty.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think this is all a purposeful effort to try to manipulate people through these various forms of media.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, with the media side of things, I've said it quite a few times, and I literally cannot get my head around it. The latest movie that Barack Obama made or produced or whatever he did,
Oh, really? What
uh,
was that?
what was it called? Don't
Um,
leave them. No, Leave the World Behind. It's on Netflix.
Is that the one with the cargo ship that crashed?
yeah, that's
Yeah,
the
on the
And
beach.
people are connecting that to the Baltimore Bridge collapse. Do you guys see that?
Yeah,
one.
That was
yeah,
weird because those guys got held on that ship for like 4 weeks in Baltimore Harbor. No cell phones or anything. A lot of people were saying that it was you could see the lights on the boat flicker. People were saying that the boat was hacked. It was a cyber attack. I don't know. Um, Other people say that it was just like an engine failure. But if you look at the video, it's like the thing's being like steered directly into the support beam of that bridge, the Francis Scott Key Bridge. I actually went to college down in Baltimore. Been over that bridge many times. Um, so very, very peculiar.
yeah. It almost seems like one of them things like when it first happened, it was a bit, oh God, look what's happened. And then everyone's theories came out. And then you sort of start thinking, well, is everyone making theories about anything now at this point? But then the more you look into it, it's like, oh, it actually seems legit. Like that boat was like weirdly, like you just said, was weirdly headed in that direction.
Right, right. It's a double-edged sword thing that we talked about again. It's like people go overboard with everything, and you need to exercise a degree of common sense when it comes to this stuff. What is the most logical answer to this? And nobody can tell you exactly what that's going to be, but you have to do your own research and judge for yourself. Which, by the way, the mainstream media is coming out with all these articles about the dangers of doing your own research on COVID, or the dangers of doing your own research on politics. And it's like, just trust us to guide you the right decision. It's like the lead bull leading everybody else, all the other bulls off the cliff.
Yeah, yeah. It's like they're clutching at straws at this point because the generation that's coming up now, when the generation that watched mainstream media sort of past their time, they're going to be left with no views because the new generation that's coming up, even like to be fair, even if you're like left or right or believer or non-believer or whatever, they're still not really watching mainstream media. They're just stuck in the record chamber um, of their own independent media at this point.
Exactly.
Um, One thing I did want to ask you, we didn't really progress to it just because we've been talking about all sorts. About the Younger Dryas. Do you, if do you want to go into exactly what the Younger Dryas is to sort of begin
Yeah,
with?
yeah. So it's a theory that has been brought up many times by scholars like Graham Hancock, Randall Carlson, Jimmy Corsetti, Ben Van Kerkwick. It's been discussed on Joe Rogan many different times, but it's essentially the idea that a great cataclysm occurred and there was an advanced civilization that existed on Earth prior to this Younger Dryas, which this civilization would have been responsible for the construction of the pyramids, the construction of the Sphinx of Giza, the construction of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, as well as many other ancient megalithic sites around the world, including ones that are under the water. So, and it's a theory that I personally subscribe to. I mean, I look at some of these structures, and I look at the precision of the Great Pyramid in particular, and how you can't even fit a razor blade in between them. And to think that this was created using slave labor is ridiculous in my opinion. There was some form of technology that was being utilized by these people that has been lost today, or been forgotten, or has been purposely suppressed, in my view. And you look at the intricate if you look at like a diagram of the Great Pyramid and the different pockets and chambers in between, and you see the subterranean shaft that goes down into an aquifer underneath the pyramid. And this sort of gets into Christopher Dunn's pyramid power plant theory, is that the pyramid was some form of acoustical resonator that created some sort of power generation. And actually, there's a great guy that I listen to called Billy Carson. I'm not sure if you've heard of him, but he talks about how uh, the prophet Moses, who led his people, who led the slaves out of Egypt, had actually stolen the Ark of the Covenant. Like, the Ark of the Covenant was actually what was inside the king's chamber at the Great Pyramid. He stole the Ark of the Covenant. It was some form of technology, or some type of nuclear reactor. It had some sort of nuclear component to it. And this is why in the Bible, when you read about how the Philistines then stole the Ark of the Covenant from Moses, the Philistines started developing all these ailments, all these sicknesses that were eerily similar to radiation sickness. Like, their fingernails were falling off, they were developing, um, their hair was falling out. They were developing all these ailments that was very similar to radiation sickness. So I thought that was a very interesting idea, is that this Ark of the Covenant was actually used as some form of nuclear reactor within the Great Pyramid that was stolen by Moses, or pilfered by Moses, before leading his people out of Egypt and ultimately to Israel. So,
Where do you think the Ark of the Covenant is now?
oh man, who knows? I mean, if you follow Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Germans stole it, right? And then it was what did Indiana do with it later on? Oh yeah, it was I think it was put in the archives. Maybe it's in the Vatican archives. That Remember that scene at the end of the movie where they like Indiana's
Oh, wait,
all pissed off
it's
because
in like a warehouse.
it's in a warehouse
Yeah.
with like in a box, and then it pans out and there's like a million other boxes to resemble all these other architectural, or these ancient artifacts that they found and then have kept hidden from the public. So I think, if the Ark of the Covenant has been discovered, it's probably being hidden from us. Or maybe it's Trump's replica. Maybe Trump's replica at Mar-a-Lago is the real Ark of the Covenant. Who knows?
Well, we had a guy on a while ago now, but when we was talking about Iraq, he his theory behind it, and I guess a lot of people's theories behind it was we didn't go to Iraq for any weapons of mass destruction. That was just a complete ruse. We went there to destroy evidence of Younger Dryas, like basically evidence from way back when. Have you heard much about that sort of theory?
Well, I did see that in areas of Iraq that we quote unquote liberated, the jihadi what is it? The Islamic jihadi uh, tribes, what is it called? ISIS, sorry. ISIS or ISIL, they went in there and they were destroying all these ancient megaliths. So they were destroying the ancient Sumerian statues and tablets that were in there. I'm sure you guys have seen them. The Sumerian gods holding the pine cone, the half man, half beast tablets. There's videos of these Salafi jihadists going in there and destroying these ancient megaliths, and I mean, you watch these videos, it makes you want to cry because it's like a clear as day destruction of our history. And I'm not sure if that's the reason that we invaded Iraq or whether it was really about oil. I know it wasn't about weapons of mass destruction or babies taken out of incubators. That is, at this point should be clear to everybody that that was a lie. Um, but I don't know for certain whether it was about destroying our history, destroying ancient megaliths. I've seen other things about online how there was like a wormhole or a portal in Iraq that we were trying to go after. So I don't know about any of that, but I do know that I've seen recent videos where ISIS has been in sections of Iraq destroying historical tablets and documents.
Yeah. Well, that's why when we did have that guy on, we brought up the wormhole to him, which was it's obviously like far-fetched, obviously. Um, but yeah, that's what he responded with that, and it just got me thinking, like, with everything else that's going on with all sorts of ancient sort of information that we've got out there, to me, and the fact that we know about the false narratives of the invasion of Iraq, and even like with a lot of people do believe oil, and it is probably the most sort of realistic approach is the oil side of things, but it does make me think like, is oil being just a bit of a bonus for them? Is that a little bit of an extra payday? And the fact that they've got in there and they've got all of these sort of they've had the ability to wipe out all of this ancient knowledge, is that their main goal and the oil's just a little extra payday for them?
Well, nothing's off the table these days. I mean, we've been lied to about so much stuff. I mean, I don't even disparage people who believe in flat Earth. I mean, I don't personally subscribe to that idea. I mean, I can look out in a telescope and I see everything else as a sphere, so it's logical to assume that we're also on a sphere. But I mean, I believe a lot of the footage has been faked. I know that some of the pictures have been faked. Um, and then they're clearly hiding land from us in Antarctica. 90% of it is off limits. Why the hell is that? Who knows? So it's part of the reason why I don't disparage people who do believe in flat Earth, even though I don't personally believe in it, because, I can see why you would believe some of these far-fetched things given how much we've been lied about.
Yeah, because it sort of it's I can understand completely, and I'm probably on the same wavelength of you, definitely when it comes to the flat Earth side of things. But it seems like we're in such a weird place where it's like we've been lied to so much, and we are discovering that more and more of what we've not been told is true. So then it leads a lot of the populations for their imagination to run wild and think, well, if that's all wrong, then and this is all right, then any like the possibilities are endless of what could be correct. And I think that's where the flat earth theories sort of come to is people have just had sort of um that much uncovered or discovered that that's they've been lied to and they've now discovered that's right, that their imagination can run wild to a certain degree. And I'm not even here to say that they're wrong because I don't know. Like I can't believe that I can't believe either way at this point. I can only believe what I've been what's been proven to me. And the Earth's not been proven to me really, has it? We've seen a few photos, but until I'm able to go in a spaceship and go out of Earth, I don't know if it's round or if it's flat.
Well, exactly. And, as you said, the public has kind of developed this psychosis where we've been lied to about so much that some people are going off the reservation and thinking that everything's fake. I mean, with the Blue Anon stuff that I was talking about before, where the Trump thing, the assassination attempt was all staged, it's fake blood and everything. And then personally, I think flat Earth may also be some sort of psyop as well to kind of get us off the trail of what's actually true. And if, there's a lot of people who are trying to embed the flat Earth thing with the Tartaria narrative and kind of clump these two together. And I don't think that we should do that, especially in context of because we can go in a lot of these old world buildings and we see astrological symbolism everywhere. We see around Earth literally encoded into the stonework of the old world. So to try to group the Tartaria hypothesis with the flat Earth hypothesis, I think, is a mistake, but I think it is an intentional effort to try to group these things together to try to discredit the whole theory. And that's part of where I think the advanced technology stuff comes in as well, where they try to say that, Tartaria was the one world Tartarians. They conquered the world, and they had all this advanced technology, and they created essentially all the beautiful architecture that is in Western civilization. I think that is leading us off the trail of the truth as well, because as we discussed, I don't think that Tartaria actually got out of Eurasia and the Middle East. I mean, there's some writings that say they tried to invade Japan and they failed and they were blown off course and reached Peru, but it's few and far in between. Based on the textual evidence that I've read, that empire never really expanded beyond Eurasia and the Middle East, but they were a key component, a key player in fighting against the centralization of powers that occurred possibly after the millennial reign of Christ, which is a whole nother topic, whole nother can of worms that we can get into. I'm kind of on the fence on that one in particular, but essentially the idea is that as foretold in Revelation 20 in the Bible by the Apostle Paul, that he saw an angel come down from heaven to lock away the devil with a great key for 1,000 years. And this was the 1,000-year reign of Christ. And a lot of people in this community hypothesize that that millennial reign has already happened somewhere between 100 AD and 1100 AD, that we did have this millennial reign, this spiritual reign of Christ, where a lot of these buildings were constructed, a lot of this humanitarian knowledge was shared, whether it be astrology, architecture, other humanitarian sciences, alchemy, you name it. And that when this millennial reign ended, that led to the Avignon papacy, these upheavals in Rome, the struggle for power between these different bishops over the papal throne, and that ultimately this was the beginning of the consolidation of power after the millennial reign, and that when Genghis Khan came along, he united the Tartars and the Mongols in order to fight against this increasing consolidation of power in the world, and ultimately paid the ultimate price for it because they defied the papacy and were ultimately crushed, destroyed, and had their history completely whitewashed. I mean, if you even talk about the Mongol Empire today, we know, I mean, everybody acknowledges the Mongol Empire was massive. They conquered the largest swath of territory that any empire has ever held in the history of civilization, but yet we're fed this narrative that they were nothing more than savage barbarian tribes who roamed around from province to province, taxing and terrorizing the good Christian citizenry of Russia. I mean, this could not be further from the truth, in my view. These people clearly had a sophisticated culture. They were capable of building architecture at scale, and they did have centralized leadership under the Khanes. And they clearly had a very powerful military that they were able to get to this point where they were able to maintain control over these giant swaths of Eurasia for centuries and centuries.
Before speaking to you today and you saying that Genghis Khan was part of the Tartarian Empire and all the details you've told us about the Tartarian Empire, I always just thought Genghis Khan was. I've not done much research on Genghis Khan, so I don't really know, but like my base knowledge of him was somebody who just went around village to village, raping and pillaging.
Exactly. And they tell us they lived in tents and yurts and they built nothing of lasting value. There is no Mongol architecture, there is no Tartar architecture that still exists to this day. So we're told. But then we can look at things like Kazansky Station in Moscow, which I've done many videos on my channel. We can look at Sumbeka Tower in Kazan, and we find all these writings that talk about how these were actually built by the Tartars before the Russian Empire conquered them and before the history was whitewashed by the Soviet Union. So we know that they were capable of building architecture. They were capable of building things that lasted, and they weren't just, these marauders, these brutes who roamed around raping and pillaging.
It makes sense, doesn't it? Like, how can an empire be so vast and hold that empire together for so long without having some organization and being somewhat advanced? Like, if it's not bringing any benefit to the places that they've taken over, then surely the people of those places will just forget about the empire, or somebody else would come in and who's a little bit more advanced and knows more about the military would just come and take it over.
Right. History is written by the victors. It's something that I've really been watching out for lately is the horde narrative. We see this in a couple different places in our history, the horde narrative, which is it encompasses all the Mongol Empire. We're taught that they're the horde of savages, and we're also taught that about the Native Americans. Maybe not so much today. We've kind of changed the dialogue around there, but this narrative that these people were hordes of savages before the great European conquerors came in and brought civilization, Christianized these areas. It's a complete farce. This was clearly a sophisticated empire that had a powerful military. Otherwise, there's no way that they would have been able to hold a horde of barbarians would have been able to hold control over Moscow until 1480, or Kazan until 1552, or Crimea, all of Crimea until 1783. There is absolutely no chance. So anytime that we see this horde narrative, this derogatory term assigned to a civilization, we need to really dig in and question what is actually going on here. Were these people really just uncivilized savages, or is this just what we're being told by the conquerors?
Right. Yeah. It's same as like when a lot of what I sort of compare my knowledge to now from what I've learned since finishing school is what was I taught in school compared to what information's out there now, what I know nothing about. And Genghis Khan, Tataria, all of it was not mentioned in any of my education at all. I don't think Genghis Khan came up in a single lesson I had in school.
I think we had one class on it, and it was like they're a giant civilization, they're horde of barbarians. We conquered and Christianized them. That's the end. I mean, that's literally it, and it goes so much deeper than what we've been told. And I think the reason for that, Cam, the reason that our education system doesn't do that anymore is because or it doesn't teach about the Mongols and the Tartars anymore, is largely because of the efforts in the early 20th century, like we talked about around World War II and World War I, with the establishment of the General Education Board in the United States, corporatizing the American school system. Because we can go back to the 1800s and we'll find textbooks like Edwin Williams' textbook from 1825, where it talks about the Tartarian Empire and how they did rise to power, how Genghis Khan was the great uniter who united the Tartars and the Mongols, who descended from Alonzo Khan, and ultimately descended from Noah and his son Japhet. So we can see in the 1800s, they were teaching this stuff, albeit they were starting to whitewash it a little bit, like in the textbook I reference. They'll still call them savages, or that, they were really just conquerors, and they had no, culture or centralized leadership. But they do teach us at least about the Tartars and the Mongols, and it goes a little bit deeper than what we're told today. And it's been a coordinated effort over the centuries to do away with that narrative and do away with that section of our history.
Mm. Have you managed to look inside some of those textbooks from way back when?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my most recent videos, I dive into probably 10 different sources, various magazines, textbooks, writings, talking about the Tartarian Empire, talking about how they were capable of building architecture at scale, talking about how they did have centralized leadership under the Khans, talking about how Genghis Khan reunited the Mongols and the Tartars, how they were descendants of the biblical prophet Noah and his son Japhet, Turk, all the Khans that that led to that lineage. So yes, we've dove into that topic many times on my channel.
Mm. And with the education system, am I right in saying that it was in the early 1900s when Rockefeller got involved
Yep,
with
the Rockefeller initiatives.
what he needed to do, and he completely changed. Well, we completely changed the education system into what we're still living today, into
Right.
this.
I mean,
Element.
plain and simple, you look at it, it is one of the most elite members of our society buying out the entire American school system. It is a complete corporatization of the American public school system. And that's what Rockefeller did with the General Education Board in the early 1900s. And I'm not sure. I'm sure there was a similar effort in Europe and in England during that time frame. And again, with the papacy, which still exists to this day. I've been to the Vatican. It's probably giant archives underneath it. Um, there was a coordinated effort through the Catholic Inquisitions to control the narrative and to control what people were allowed to research, what schools were allowed to teach. And this has been something that's been going on since the 14th, 15th centuries.
Hmm. Did you say you've been to the Vatican?
Yes.
How did you find it? I've heard some people go there and they, they feel weird when they're in there.
Well, I'll tell you, when I stepped into Rome, I did get a weird feeling. It was like an aura of like power. And I've only felt that one other place in the world, and that was Washington, D.C. And I don't know why that is. I just got a feeling when I stepped into Rome itself that it had this aura or presence to it. The Vatican in particular, I didn't feel too much different from Rome as a whole. But I mean, you go in there and you see all the stuff that they've pillaged from Egypt. You have these granite diorite statues, which are precision carved. No chance they did that with hammer and chisel. And they have all this plunder, all these artifacts that they've plundered from various civilizations over time, particularly Egypt. So that was really interesting to go there. They also have the giant pine cone made out of copper in the middle of their plaza. And they also have this weird like modern thing. It's like a sphere that's like a cracks in it. I don't even know how to describe it. It looks like a hole in the world. Have you guys seen this?
No, that's an
Like,
odd thing.
let me see if I can find it. Vatican globe. Yeah, some people talk about the hollow Earth, that there's a big hole in Antarctica where you can go in and the reptilians live or something. Um, I will say, I mean, there's some evidence with have you guys heard of Admiral Byrd's journey down
Yeah,
to
Yeah.
Antarctica in World War II? So that piqued my interest. And there's a diary where there's some speculation whether it was actually his or somebody else's, but it talks about how he flew over this giant hole in the ground, and there was lush rainforest in areas of Antarctica. I mean, who knows? The fact that they are not allowing us to go or visit 90% of that landmass is very suspicious, in my opinion. Not saying I believe everything that people speculate about that sculpture, but man, it's very strange that the United Nations, like all these nations got together and said, "Oh yeah, we're gonna make this landmass off limits except to specific scientists that we have that we choose can visit certain areas of this. We're not going to allow you to fly over it. We're not going to allow the average person to even do a boat tour around the whole thing. Um, you can only visit one part of it." And that's why people feed into the flat Earth thing, because they're like, well, why? What are they hiding into Antarctica? Is it an ice wall? Is it just a complete ice wall around the entire Earth? I mean, a lot of these theories and speculation could be solved by just allowing people to go visit Antarctica, or allowing people to go visit the Hall of Records in Mount Rushmore, for instance. There's a lot of this speculation that could be cleared up if they just allowed us to go to these places, and they don't. And I think that answers. I mean, it leads us to more questions, but I think it answers the biggest question of all. Are they hiding something from us? I think the answer is clearly yes.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree because with the Antarctica, the only information that is actually out there is this information about Andrew Bird going over and then seeing what he saw. But that's the only information that I've managed to find on Antarctica, unless it being just some bullshit from anyone else. That's the only like, and yeah, I'd say out of the flat Earth theory, the only thing that really draws me into it, aside from like, I don't believe in all of this when they try and measure the ocean line and stuff like that.
Right, right.
I can't really get my head around that stuff because logically it doesn't make sense to me. But yeah, it's the fact that Bird went over and that information's out there. Whether or not he did it, we'll never ever know.
Hmm.
But it's the only information I've ever been able to find on the matter. So there's no information that they're giving us apart from it's just ice and you can't live there. And it's too dangerous to travel.
Right. You know, there's clearly something more going on here with our world. And we talked about, you know, astrology, the alignment of Polaris. We've talked about the moon, but the moon is another like huge anomaly that, you know, we only ever see one side. It's tidally locked with Earth. It's the perfect size for precise solar eclipses. We don't see that anywhere else in the universe. I think there are clear signs of intelligent design in our planet and in our galaxy. And it's something that the ancients used to acknowledge. It's something that was widely regarded by most civilizations up until the 15th and 16th centuries with the rise of the Catholic Inquisitions. So I think there's a lot more to the world than what we're being told. And we're just trying to figure out, we're trying to get to the bottom of what the truth is. And, you know, we're going to be right about some things, we're going to be wrong about others, but we're really just trying to be honest and trying to figure out what the hell we're living on, what and what the truth about our universe is. And that's all we can really do as lay people here. None of us control the world. We're not, you know, the Rothschilds. We're not, you know, one of these global controller groups. We're not at the Bilderberg conferences. We don't really know the truth, and I don't think we ever really will. We just get the breadcrumbs and we're trying to piece everything together the best that we can. And I have hope that we're going to at least figure out the majority of stuff in the coming centuries, and we're going to see a radical change in civilization to push us back to a more virtuous world, a more virtuous society. Because what's going on now is clearly a lot of deception going on. There's clearly a lot of evil that is the evil forces that are controlling various aspects of our planet. And I see in our future a pushback against that. And I see us getting back to a place where the world is a more harmonious place. Personally, I'm very hopeful about that.
Yeah. No, I do definitely appreciate the positivity. It's like when, if you look at it like the people that are controlling, let's not even say they're controlling the world just for this example, like the people that are influencing us, right? The politicians, the people who are at the top that have the most influence on us. If we're finding out bit by bit that they're lying, deceiving, the nasty people, the greedy, they're all of anything that you can describe as negative in the world, that is, they share them same traits, right? Greed or everything. That if there are main influences in what should be our sort of the people we look up to, our role models, or even yeah, with role models, if you're looking at Hollywood celebrities, and they are just liars and horrible people, that's obviously going to trickle down into the levels below. And the levels below are, I wouldn't say necessarily us because we're kind of like, luckily we've managed to break out of it somewhat. But you get majority of people who just still tune in, follow the celebrities, go to Taylor Swift concerts, tune into their Netflix every single night. They're just, I'm watching the news, BBC News or CNN or whatever, that all they're being taught is how to lie, deceive, and subconsciously it's right for them. So that they're the traits that they're then going to occupy, and then they're going to go out into the world, the normal world, not this world that them guys live in above us, this normal world, and just keep spreading that sort of weird negativity. Um, so the only thing I can think is the more we have these conversations and the more these become more mainstream, just talking, we're not doing anything wrong apart from having a conversation. The more this becomes normalized, the more it will trickle down, and then people will have a bit more balance and they'll share. It's fair to have negativity, but you need to also occupy the same amount of positivity. But it just seems so one-sided at the moment, and there's no balance in the world because of the issues.
Well, exactly. When you put bullshit on a pedestal, what are people going to aspire to? They're going to aspire to bullshit. So I couldn't agree more. I think it's super important that we have these type of conversations, and that we try to, people have power. I think people feel very powerless in our current civilization, but I mean, we really do have the power to enact change on our civilization. There's going to be a lot of pushback, but just by having conversations like this, just by trying, by striving for something better, we're going to create something better. So I think that's something that people need to keep in mind, is that as long as we're trying, and as long as that we have a positive vision of where we want to get, and we're taking steps towards that, we may never get to exactly what we're envisioning, but we're going to improve our current state. So if we fall into despair, or if we fall into this trap of following these celebrities and these people who are perpetuating or trickling down these evil values, then we're just going to continue falling into that. Again, we have free will in our society. Nobody's going to come and save us. We need to save ourselves, and we need to be responsible for removing the bullshit off the pedestal and putting something more positive up there to aspire to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. I think on that note, we'll end this one.
Yeah, it's always good to end on a positive note.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate you guys having me on. This was a blast.
Oh, no, thanks for coming on, man. This has been great, Jack. Honestly, this has been really, really good.